The series opener introduces us to Che, our protagonist, who tells us she is 27 years old, has a catastrophic personality, and works a job she absolutely hates, spending 6 hours a day chopping onions. But that is not even the worst part. Her health is in terrible shape, and she suffers from sudden, random nosebleeds. Her doctor, who should be delivering better news, tells her that her heart failure has reached a critically advanced stage. From this moment on, there is no doubt that she will die. The only real question left is when it will happen. After receiving the shocking news that her heart could stop at any minute, Che leaves the clinic feeling down and discouraged, looking for the slightest opportunity to vent her frustration on someone. Unfortunately, a Jehovah's Witness tries to force a pamphlet into her hand and suffers the consequences. This scene is witnessed by a guy who worries about her, but he just does not have the courage to approach her at that moment. Yeon stands there watching Che for a while as she makes a huge scene, yelling at people that the end of the world is coming soon. Meanwhile, that night, a guy was rummaging through trash, looking for valuable items to sell. He trips and falls into a huge puddle. The bad news is that it is not just water. A black liquid leaking from a pipe sticks to his skin and causes a strange mutation. Before he can even realize what is happening, the guy collapses, his skin changes color completely, and he ends up suffocating, or maybe transforming into something very different. The next morning, a man is in an office claiming that his friend went missing, and when he shows the photo, we realize it is the guy from the dumpster. This office does not belong to the police, but rather to a volunteer group dedicated to helping people in need. The downside is that crazy individuals always show up with hard-to-believe stories, looking only to waste their time. The craziest one of all is a guy who constantly claims he saw a 7-foot-long fish eat his bicycle, and that there is something weird in the water that turns everything it touches into monsters. Since today is Yeon's very first day, dealing with him is his initiation ritual. But while everyone expected Yeon to just sit in his chair and listen to the crazy man ramble for an hour, the guy surprises them all. He tells him that his complaint has been filed and an inspection will take place soon. This shuts the storyteller up, making him threaten to go straight to the director. However, it is clear he does not know anyone in that office and has no power to do anything like that. During lunch, Yeon is sitting outside eating a sandwich. Right then, the old man from the volunteer office shows up to tell him to be careful, warning him that people are disappearing near the dumpster and that the crazy guy's stories are not completely fabricated. But it is pretty hard to believe any of this when the guy giving you the warning suddenly steals your juice box and walks away. Shortly after, we see the old man hiding out in a sort of hangar where he keeps his belongings. He is about to eat a piece of bread when the woman with the religious pamphlets appears yet again, offering him salvation. As expected, the old man tells her to get lost, but at that exact moment, his things begin to float in midair. They are then compressed with such intense force that the scene fades to black. Next, we see Che trying to convince her grandmother to give her money to travel to one of the 8 wonders of the world. When her grandmother asks why she wants to travel, Che lacks the courage to admit she could die at any moment, so she just runs off. She leaves someone else to chop the onions at work to try and gather enough cash to see the world before she passes away. As she leaves the shop, she bumps into Yeon, who notices a bit of hair sticking out of her suitcase. Believing Che might be a dangerous criminal or maybe a murderer, he asks her to open the bag so he can let her go, but they end up scuffling. Until the suitcase bursts open and all of her belongings go flying, including a stuffed animal, proving the whole thing was just a huge misunderstanding. To make matters worse, all of her stuff is getting soaked because it is absolutely pouring outside. The guy apologizes, helps her pick up her things, and then leaves. But that night, we find out he lives in a completely trashed apartment, and his neighbors cannot stand the loud noise he makes. A few seconds later, we discover that Yeon has a black binder stuffed with files on kids who seem to have superpowers, stemming from a series of unethical labs that were busted a few years ago. However, the children are missing, and tracking them down is part of his job. At that moment, we cut back to Mr. King, the old man who was kidnapped by the cult members, who keep him locked up in a cell. From there, he can see several bodies lying on stretchers, but the most terrifying sight is a monster trapped inside a glass cage. As for Che, it turns out the crazy storyteller is actually her friend. That afternoon, she goes to them to ask for a favor. She needs to extort her grandmother for enough cash to travel, so they hatch a plan to fake a kidnapping. The problem is that right after they record the video, she suffers a sudden cardiac arrest and ends up dying right there in the chair. When the fools realize that Che is completely dead and they have a video of her begging for 50 million or else they will kill her, they panic and carry her body through the woods to hide it in the dump. The only problem is they end up bumping into Yon, who walks up to them and asks the old man why. If he complains so much about people dumping trash here, he is doing the exact same thing. Yon notices their sketchy behavior and tries to ask what they are carrying in the cart, but terrified, they end up shoving it. The cart rolls down the hill until Che's body finally flies out and lands right in the contaminated water. From a distance, you can clearly see it is a corpse, and Yon immediately glares at them, sparking a tense standoff. He decides to run, but the guys end up pushing him toward the cliff, and everyone ends up falling into the filthy water. Strangely enough, a few seconds later, Che's body completely vanishes. Yon threatens to call the cops if they do not tell him exactly what happened. Right then, the crazy storyteller lunges at him, trying to grab his phone. By accident, he hits the call button. Since it is an emergency call, the police instantly track the number and tell him they are sending a squad car over right away. The police arrive a few minutes later, and Yon turns the guys in. He tells the officers he caught them dumping Miss Che's body and gives them her description. The cop listens closely to everything while his partner handcuffs the guys, but the strangest and funniest part is that a few seconds later, Che pops up right behind everyone, completely alive. The guys pass out from shock when they see her. She has no clue what happened or why she is still breathing. The second episode picks up right where we left off, but now we see things from Che's perspective, revealing she traveled from one spot to another lightning fast, proving there is absolutely no doubt that she is alive. At the precinct, we learn the crazy guy's name is Guillaume, and he keeps telling the officers he was only watching the dump to make sure nobody trashed it when Yon showed up and started throwing accusations around. They did not kill anyone. How can they be murderers if the girl is alive? As soon as they get out of the precinct, they visit Che at the hospital. She tells them she had a bizarre vision of a woman screaming at her from a cave, but she could not understand the language she was speaking. Right then, they start arguing about the flaws in their plan. They could have never squeezed 50 million out of her grandmother with such a dumb scheme, but they are even dumber because, while arguing, they fail to notice that the grandmother has just walked into the room and overheard absolutely everything they said. They are so terrified of her that they end up hiding, and Che quickly jumps into the closet. The only problem is that when she opens her eyes, she realizes she is no longer in the closet, or even in the hospital. Somehow, she has traveled through space and time, and now she is witnessing a torture session carried out back in the 15th century in a Japanese village. When her grandmother opens the closet door, Che snaps back to reality. Now she is truly terrified and decides to confess everything that is happening to her, especially the awful fact that she could drop dead at any given second. Outside the room, Yon is standing there, overhearing their entire conversation, and a few seconds later, we discover that he has powers too, though he has managed to control them a bit better. Seconds later, the scene shifts, and we see Mr. King trapped in a vivid hallucination triggered by a girl with powers who is pumping him for a lot of information. The old man confesses that he used to be a security guard at the underground labs, and during a fire, he saved the life of subject number 3972, whom he managed to spot out in the city that very morning. Subject number 3972 turns out to be Yon, and his actual power is telekinesis. Right then, we get a flashback revealing that dozens of children were subjected to these experiments to grant them superpowers, but not many of them survived, and Yon was one of the strongest ones. We immediately cut to his apartment, where we see him wake up completely shaken and drenched in sweat from a nightmare about the day of the fire. But the worst part is that all of his furniture is hovering in mid-air, and it suddenly crashes down onto the floor, causing the loud noise that the neighbors complain so much about. At the hospital, the doctor reveals to the grandmother that Che is completely healthy, and what happened to her is a total miracle for which there is no medical explanation whatsoever. That night, the grandmother makes a call to a guy named Choi. On his business card, we can see the laboratory logo, which is the exact same logo we saw on the religious cult's pamphlet. Meanwhile, Guillaume is arguing with Azumi about how close they came to going to prison. When furious, he hurls a soda can at the wall, and what happens next does not make much sense. At that exact moment, something weird is happening to Guillaume too. No matter how hard he tries, he cannot unstick his hand from the refrigerator door. As for Azumi, the can did not just pass through the wall, it pierced the next one, and the one after that, until it finally vanished into the horizon. The next morning, Che is certain her grandmother talked to the doctor and found out everything, but it turns out the old woman is thrilled, since her results came back perfectly normal, and there is no logical explanation for the miracle that just happened to her. To celebrate this wonderful news, her grandmother has a great gift for her. She bought her a plane ticket and has her passport ready so she can travel and see the world. But first, she has to fill up a drawing of a grape cluster with good deeds, something she used to do since she was a little girl. Later that day, Yon pays them a visit and asks them straight up how many times Che has died and if they know anything about the prodigy children. But they have absolutely no clue what he is talking about, so he tells them to just forget what he said and walks out. As soon as Che heads out into the street, he starts tailing her. Based on what he knows, he is positive that she has the power to come back to life. So, to test his theory, he is going to use his telekinesis to try and kill her. Che spots him and takes off running, sparking a chase all the way to the abandoned barn where they had planned the fake kidnapping. The bad news is that Yon is the one holding the camera and the footage showing exactly how they tried to make it look like a real abduction. Che hides inside the barn, but Yon uses his powers to turn the place into a pile of rubble, leaving the young woman just seconds away from being crushed to death. However, she manages to trigger her powers and teleports onto a small fishing boat out in the middle of the ocean. The problem is that the boat's owners are dangerous criminals, and the second they see her, they draw their weapons. The last thing we see before the scene fades to black is a bullet flying straight toward her head. We cut directly to the mansion of Director Choi, who is receiving a visit from the doctor in charge of the project. The last thing we see is a photograph of the doctor and Che's grandmother getting splattered with blood. Back at the field, where the large barn stood, Che returns from her trip and discovers that her sweater has been pierced by a bullet, though she is thankfully unharmed. That night, she is talking to Azumi and tells her she knows exactly what is happening to her. She has the incredible power to teleport, so they head over immediately to see Guillaume, who at that exact moment has his hand stuck to a vase, though he doesn't want to admit it to them. He just listens as Che explains that he has powers, and Azumi does too. Panicking, Guillaume confesses what he witnessed that afternoon. Yon has powers too, and he tried to murder her while she was inside the barn, destroying the entire place with his bare hands. So, she rushes over to his office and spots him leaving, deciding to tail him and ask him flat out why he is trying to kill her. Meanwhile, Che's grandmother is at the morgue looking at Director Choi's corpse, as the officer hands over a letter stating that Dr. Hwando is innocent and everyone owes him an apology. At that moment, we see Director Choi's final moments, back when the doctor asked him where the Child of Eternity was, and he replied that he was at the corner of Flavor next to the Queen. After that, one of the girls with powers who was present took total control of his body and forced him to take his own life using his letter opener. Back with the guys, they finally managed to catch Yon and are driving him in the truck, trying to ask him what the hell is going on and what they should do now that everyone has powers. But the guy sticks closely to his alibi and does not reveal that he has such a powerful ability. But the guys already know his big secret and want to convince him to be their master so he can teach them how to use their powers. When Yon refuses, they kick him out of the truck, threatening to leave him stranded in the middle of nowhere. Right then, a squad car comes swerving down the road. In the driver's seat is the cop who got covered in the filthy water while trying to stop the guys the night before. His face has changed completely. It looks as if it were literally melting. The squad car ends up running completely off the road, so the guys forget all about their fight and rush to rescue the officers. But the car is catching fire way too fast, and they do not have the strength to move it. When things get truly dangerous, Yon decides to take action and finally shows them his powers. With that, Che manages to pull the officer out, but he looks as if he were made of rubber, stretching out just like a toy. But that is not even the biggest problem. Guillaume has placed his hand on the squad car and has gotten completely stuck once again. Now, they are the ones in danger of burning to death. Fortunately, Azumi ends up using her super strength to rip the metal off the vehicle, and once they are safe, Yon uses his powers one more time to hurl the squad car far away. As soon as everyone is safe and back in the city, the first thing Yon does is distance himself, telling them to figure out their own problems. He then heads over to the bookstore and starts researching the drainage system to find out where the water that gave them powers is coming from, and when he discovers it originates from the Church of Salvation, realization, everything finally starts making perfect sense. Che and the guys go to the hospital to see if there is any reward for saving the cops, but it turns out the officers never even made it to the hospital, and there is no record of any accident. However, we can clearly see they have been taken to the church, where the cult plans to cover up the evidence of what happened. The moment he steps out of the office, he realizes someone is waiting for him. It is subject number 4885, who now goes by Quimple, and he came to warn him to stop sticking his nose into their business. Quimple tells him that the doctor has magnificent plans for this place, and they would not like to be disturbed at all. On top of that, they are already rounding up the defectives, so they do not cause any more trouble. It is at this exact moment that Yeon realizes the guys are in serious danger. Later on, Che pays him a visit to beg him once again to be their master and fill them in on everything that is going on. But right then, a co-worker almost catches them. Yeon has no choice but to use his powers to lift Che into the air so nobody can spot her. However, as Che finally leaves the hospital, Yeon notices that Quimple is tailing her. Since she is considered a defective because she got her powers in a less than pure way, they will definitely kidnap her and do horrible things to her. Quimple manages to follow Che into a dark alley where she does not notice his presence. Right then, he raises his hands and places one over the other, aiming straight at the girl. But before he can do anything else, he takes a heavy hit that sends him flying into a pile of trash. Yeon shows up a second later and warns his old partner to stay away from his friends, or things will get really ugly. Though after spending just 5 minutes with Che, he already starts to regret his decision. The very first thing the girl does is call her grandmother to let her know that she landed a job at City Hall. The old woman cannot help but celebrate, realizing that her granddaughter is finally getting her will to live back. But the moment she walks into her restaurant, she discovers that Dr. Hwando and his prodigy children are waiting right there for her. And considering that they ended up brutally murdering the last colleague they paid a visit to, the third episode wraps up with absolute nail-biting suspense. The fourth chapter opens with Che's mother arguing with the doctor. It turns out that she had sponsored him many years ago to create a sanctuary for children, but he began experimenting on them instead. Although many of the kids still love him because he was never directly mean to them, that does not erase the terrible things he did. Hwando has come to speak with her because he found out that she took in many of the children and took it upon herself to find them new families. However, there is only one who truly interests him, the child of eternity, the one who had the ability to heal himself and was practically immortal. Since the grandmother refuses to answer his questions, Yuran, one of the prodigy children, uses his powers to cruelly torture her. At that exact moment, we can see the true cause of the fire. It turns out the doctor was experimenting on the child of eternity, killing him nearly 50 times a day, just to see exactly how long it took him to come back to life. But Yeon got tired of watching him suffer, and in a sudden burst of rage, his powers caused a massive explosion, engulfing the entire laboratory in flames. A few seconds later, Che's grandmother wakes up completely alone in the restaurant just as the employees are arriving. Consequently, there is no sign of the doctor or his followers anywhere around. The next morning, Che cannot control his excitement about starting the lessons and gets City Hall vests for the rest of the team to give his teacher a pleasant surprise. But a few seconds later, a bus from the Church of Eternal Salvation appears, and 20 of its best members step down, informing them that they will also help with today's activity on a voluntary basis. Seeing those people, Yong knows it is way too dangerous for the kids to be around. If they find out that they are flawed, they will immediately put all of their families in serious danger. So he decides to lock them in a distant room and tell them that the first phase of training is to discover what feeling channels their power, and they won't leave until they completely identify it. At the same time that is happening, at the restaurant, the grandmother gets a visit from an old co-worker from a long time ago, a tech expert who has a very important tape to show her. On it, you can see the back of the restaurant and one of the prodigy children about to attack her granddaughter, but she mysteriously vanishes from one moment to the next. Che tells his friends that he focused really hard on visiting the beautiful northern lights, but when his power kicked in, he ended up in a bar called Aurora, where there were a lot of drunk old men, and he had to run away immediately. Back with Yon, he has no choice but to accompany the religious group to the cleanup session, picking up trash all day long. But when they reach a clearing far from the city, something completely unbelievable happens at that instant. All the cars and debris begin to rise into the air, and the religious members immediately drop to their knees to pray, and the group leader ends up getting crushed by a car that had been thrown forcefully toward Yon. A few seconds later, Kimpal appears to tell him that today could be his last day alive. It is time for him to decide whether to join them or die, once and for all. Kimpal's ability is all about gravity. He can alter, accelerate, and decrease it at will, while Yon commands telekinesis, so this great fight is going to be very interesting. The boys start throwing cars and everything they have on hand at each other, and a few seconds later, Che appears right next to Yon and tells him that she finally made it. Now she is closer to mastering her power, but what she doesn't realize is that she just stepped right into the lion's den, and she could die at any second. Just when a car was about to kill her, her power kicked in once more, and she returned to the small room with her friends. But at that moment, she decided to use her power one more time and take Azumi along with her to safely help them defend their teacher. The bad news is that Azumi still doesn't know exactly how to unlock his power, so for the next few seconds, they just cry and scream in panic, being more of a nuisance than anything else in that place. Realizing they don't have the necessary power to beat Kimpal, Che tries to use her power to get them all out of there. But that is the exact moment when the villain prepares his final attack, lifting a bunch of cars into the air to bury the three of them under a large pile of steel. The massive amount of steel crashes down on all of them, but Che manages to teleport away with Yon, leaving Azumi on his own. Luckily, the fear of dying just unlocked his power, and he throws a bus as if it were a simple, lightweight toy. Even though the place Che chose is extremely beautiful, and they are watching the northern lights, she has a deep cut on her neck that could tragically cause her death, and now they are hundreds of miles away from any place where they can get quick medical attention. A few seconds later, Che stops breathing and dies peacefully on the snow. Back with Azumi, he tries to be nice to Kimpal, but the guy starts using his power on him. However, no matter how many times he tries to crush him, he seems completely immune. A single clap from Kimpal is enough to turn a car into a pancake, but when he tries to do the same to the chubby Azumi, nothing happens. Only the ground around him sinks over and over again in a violent way. Back with Yon, he tries to perform CPR on Che, determined not to let her die, but that is when he notices that she has a strange scar on her chest, and a few seconds later, she wakes up as if nothing had happened. And now we truly know what happened to the boy. The 5th chapter opens by confirming the truth to us. The child of eternity did die, but his immortal heart now rests inside Che's chest, and she is not only the strongest prodigy child, but she now possesses a second ability, which makes her perhaps the most powerful of them all. In the laboratory, we discover the villain's true motivation. It turns out that the more they use their power, the more their bodies wear down and begin to mutate in a horrible way, so they urgently need the child of eternity to reverse the process. On the other hand, due to all the effort Yon put in during the fight, he has passed out for a couple of hours, and the kids take him to his apartment, where they can see that nightmares trigger his power, and all of his furniture rises into the sky because of the deep fear he is feeling. The next day, the team shows up at Yeon's job for another training session, and although they were able to use their powers yesterday, none of them know how they did it. So the first lesson remains mandatory in effect, but as they practice and try to figure out how to use their powers once more, everyone begins to have horrible hallucinations. Everyone except Yeon, who can see a hallucination of a beautiful aquarium that used to make him very happy as a child. And at that moment, Seiko begins to speak to him. Seiko turns out to be a prodigy child with a great ability to cause hallucinations at will, and she has always been in love with Yeon, so that is why she is being a little soft on him. At that moment, Yeon uses his power to choke her a bit and free his friends from the hallucination, making Seiko run away scared. That night, he confesses to Che his suspicions that she possesses the heart of the child of eternity, and upon hearing this, she goes straight to her grandmother to demand the truth. Her grandmother confesses that the child of eternity ended up crushed by a rock during the fire. His heart was still beating, but his brain no longer had life, and that was why they made that difficult decision. After the surgery, the grandmother decided to adopt her and raised her as her own, hoping to never have to relive any of this ever again. For Che, this truth is quite traumatizing, and several days go by without her speaking to her grandmother. But later, things get back on their normal track, and during the next classes, Azumi finally discovers the feeling that triggers his power. It is anger when people insult him. For Gion, it is something much simpler. It turns out he has always been a very exaggerated man with his stories, and when he starts lying, his power activates. And although it doesn't seem very useful to have things stick to you, he will surely find some good use for it. In Che's case, coffee triggers her power, and when she tastes a sip, she teleports more than a dozen times to different places, managing to experience the adventures of several lifetimes in just a few minutes in an amazing way. The problem is, they don't know how much they need, so they will have to run many tests to find out the exact dose. Once all the feelings that trigger their powers have finally been revealed, the team decides to throw a surprise party for Yeon to celebrate his birthday, and while Che goes to get the cake, Yeon shows up to talk with her. At first, it seems like the guy is going to confess his feelings to her, but when Che drops her guard, he injects a sedative into her neck, and the church followers appear to take her away. The next thing we can hear is a call between Yeon and Dr. Hwando, where the guy reveals to them that coffee is what triggers the girl's power, so they must keep her heart beating slowly so she doesn't escape from them, and the doctor promises him a dose of the cure when it is ready. In addition to the promise of the cure, Yeon also receives his file, which contains the name of his mother, whom he has been searching for his whole life. A few minutes later, Che arrives at the laboratory, where the doctor cuts her with a scalpel, and a few seconds later, the wound suddenly closes, confirming that she has the heart they need. But before they can tie her down, Che wakes up and pulls a small packet of instant coffee from her pocket, managing to teleport all over the lab, causing major chaos and escaping. The next place she appears is right in front of Yeon, who is crying as he looks at his mother's photo in the file. And upon realizing this, Che understands why he did it, and it is revealed that he was the one who carefully put the coffee in her pockets. But at that moment, Che begins to cry, and a few seconds later, her power returns her to the laboratory, where the doctor does not plan to leave anything to chance, and violently hits her on the head with a baseball bat. On the other hand, the grandmother's tech expert discovers the reason behind all of this. They don't just want to save the prodigy children, they want to save President Nam, an extremely wealthy man, and the person who had the grand idea for the project from the very beginning, but who at this exact moment is on the verge of death. In Yeon's apartment, he has just packed up all his things to leave for Seoul to look for his mother, but Azumi shows up, and this time he won't be a coward. Instead, he smashes the door with his bare hands and threatens to destroy him if he doesn't tell him where Che is right away. Yeon uses all his power to try and beat him, but with Azumi's massive strength, he can only hold him back until the phone rings, and Che's grandmother asks Yeon to meet up. It is very urgent at this moment. The grandmother begs him to please do whatever he can to save Che, and reveals to him what happened to the child of eternity and what they did with the heart. They did it for a greater good for everyone. At the same time that is happening, President Nam prepares to receive Che's heart, whom they keep completely sedated to prevent her from escaping again. Using his access at City Hall, Yeon gets the blueprints of the church and asks the grandmother to get him backup, since it won't be easy to get into that place or beat all the remaining prodigy children inside. That night, the grandmother creates the perfect distraction and offers free food to a ton of people so they will help her protest outside the church, allowing the kids to sneak through the back door stealthily. With the blueprints, they manage to find a hidden door, and that will be their entry point. Once inside, they manage to see the hundreds of liters of doses that the doctor has been creating, and using Azumi's massive strength, they take care of knocking out the guards immediately. At that exact instant, the doctor was about to cut Che's chest when Yeon appears, lifts all the sharp objects, and aims them at the medical staff, managing to save her just in time in a heroic way. At that moment, a group of armed men appears, and chaos erupts. Yeon manages to attack them, but the bullets are ricocheting all over the place, and it is necessary for them to get out of there as soon as possible for their own safety. What we see next is an action-packed scene, where we see the team facing off against the guards, and Yeon trying his best not to get in the way. When Che is finally safe, Yeon gets the idea to give her a kiss, so her heart rate quickens, and she can get out of there using her special power. But she is not willing to stay out of the fight, so she goes back to Yeon's apartment, where there are plenty of caffeine packets, and after a few minutes, she is ready to head back. By that time, Azumi has already taken care of Kimpal. He has grabbed him by the hands, and with his massive strength, he has fractured his fingers and throws him against the wall with a single slap. But Seiko has Yeon trapped in a hallucination, where he relives the fire and the tragic death of his best friend. The pain of the past and of being the person who caused the fire deeply affects Yon, and he unleashes his power, causing a massive whirlpool of debris that threatens to completely destroy the entire laboratory. Che is the only one who can calm him down, but using his power like that has completely exhausted him. So Che used her power to get them out of there, but they end up in the church, a place packed with the doctor's followers. There she can see how the doctor gives several doses of the serum to Director Nam, and he rejuvenates 50 years in 5 seconds. But the effect only lasts a minute, and then the old millionaire turns into a pile of dry bones. Che manages to escape, but a few seconds later, all the members of the church fall under Yuran's control, who orders them to catch the intruders, and the parishioners turn into a horde of zombies, chasing her everywhere in a terrifying way. In the end, they end up running into Kimpal once more, whose arms are almost destroyed from overusing his power, but he is determined to stop them, even if his own life is lost in the process. While Yon and Kimpal engage in a battle full of power, Che takes care of getting Azumi out of there, and then she looks for a way to return to help Yon, but she has completely run out of coffee packets. The next thing we can see is both boys starting to bleed from their mouths since their power is killing them from the inside, and the battle ends in a single, definitive attack, and we cannot see the winner due to all the destruction at that moment. When Che manages to return, all she finds are 2 bloodstains on the ground, and there is no sign of Yon anywhere, but there is much worse news. Gion returns to tell her that he sneaked into the laboratory like Spider-Man, walking on the walls, and heard the doctor say they will spray the entire city with the chemical, which gives some people powers and kills others in a horrible, painful way. At that instant, we can see 2 trucks loaded with tons of liquid being rushed toward the city center. In the next scene, we can see that the overuse has caused Kimpal to die. The final chapter opens with Gion's fear of not knowing if his family will die or end up turning into something like him, while the churchgoers turned into zombies surround them. But at that moment, the grandmother's backup arrives, and a massive fight breaks out at the place. Down in the laboratory, Yon is badly wounded, but he still has the strength to demand the truth from the doctor, and he tells him that he never cared about the children. In reality, he only wanted to find a way to live forever, and he did it with the child of eternity. And soon, there will be plenty of hearts of eternity that will allow him to continue his research, since at least 1 out of every 5,000 people who receive the serum will end up with that power. Even though Yon reminds him that countless people died, the doctor does not care at all. At that instant, Yuran appears with the soldiers and orders them to shoot, but Yeon stops the hundreds of bullets in midair and then sends them right back, causing total destruction throughout the laboratory. One of the bullets ends up in the doctor's chest, and then a massive explosion of fire consumes them both. After the explosion, Yuran manages to find the doctor, but he is on the verge of death, so she injects him with a dose of the serum. But nothing happens right away. Furious over the doctor's death, Yuran takes control of all the soldiers, even the grandmothers, and orders them to murder Che. But she is already far away, right at the festival, trying to find the trucks with the serum to stop them and save the entire city. The bad news is that Yon is now under Yuran's control and attacks his friends. He even throws a car at Che, but Azumi is right there to stop it, and Che takes advantage of this great opportunity to teleport him far away from there, out of Yuran's control. But the zombie army appears, and an incredible fight scene breaks out, where the kids do everything they can to fight all of them off, while making sure not to kill them. And in the end, Che manages to teleport everyone into a cell at the local police station. Luckily for them, the excess of power that Yuran has been using to control all those people has taken its toll, and death is about to come for her. But she makes Seiko promise that she will completely destroy the entire city. The next thing Seiko does is trick Yon into thinking she is Che, and when she is close enough, she stabs him in the abdomen. But one of the church followers decides to attack her from behind and pierces her with a metal rod, tragically killing Seiko by mistake. A few seconds later, a massive hot air balloon appears. It is loaded with the virus, and in less than 3 minutes, the entire city will be covered in that stuff. In one final exploit, Che asks Azumi to launch them toward the balloon, and for the first time, Gion's power comes in handy, since he manages to stick to it, and now Che just has to teleport them to a faraway, safe location. The last thing the city manages to see is how the balloon explodes, but vanishes almost at the exact same time, and the thousands of people can only celebrate. But Yon stands there staring up at the sky, hoping to see see Che return soon. But after that, days go by, and Che does not return. However, life goes on, until one day, she shows up at the restaurant, and it turns out she traveled all the way from Africa because her powers stopped working, and she didn't have a valid passport. The series ends with the team reunited once more, and with Yon very happy that she has returned, so they can continue saving the world, being the most useless heroes in history. In a post-credit scene, they show us the reunion between Yon and his mother, and the fact that the doctor didn't die, it just took a bit of time for the serum to work.